Most people walk past it every day. It sits on the table, it seasons your food. You barely notice it. But for most of human history, salt was not a condiment. It was currency, it was power. It helped fund empires, shape trade routes, provoke taxes, and place entire populations inside systems of control. What you're about to discover is not a history lesson about a mineral. It is a blueprint, a pattern so old, so consistent, and so precise that it appears again and again throughout every era of civilization. Not because rulers were geniuses, but because the logic of control never changes. Whoever owns the flow owns the game. Stay with me, because before this video ends, you will understand how this ancient pattern still operates in the modern world, how to recognize it in your own industry, and why the difference between participating in a system and positioning inside one can change everything. And more importantly, you will begin to see how wealth is rarely built by chasing the product itself, but by understanding the road, the gate, and the flow around it. Let us begin where most people never look, not at the wealth itself, but at the structure underneath it. Around 6,000 years ago, in the marshes and coasts of what we now call China, Egypt, and the Mediterranean basin, human beings discovered something that changed the trajectory of civilization. Salt could preserve meat. It could cure fish. It could extend a food supply through winter, through drought, through war. Before refrigeration, before chemistry, before any of the systems we take for granted today, salt was the only thing standing between a society and starvation. And the moment something becomes essential, it becomes valuable. And the moment something becomes valuable, someone will figure out how to own the gate. In the ancient world, salt was traded, rationed, taxed, and treated as a resource of serious value. The word salary is often linked to the Latin word salarium, historically associated with payments or allowances connected to salt, though scholars debate the exact details. But the deeper point remains. Salt became part of the language of work, value, and compensation. Think about that for a moment. The thing you pour freely from a shaker on your dinner table was once considered equivalent to gold. Not because it sparkled, not because it was rare in the way diamonds are rare, but because it was necessary, and necessity, when controlled, becomes leverage. The Romans understood this with terrifying clarity. The Via Salaria, the Salt Road, was one of the oldest and most strategically significant roads in the entire Roman Empire. It connected Rome with regions tied to salt movement and trade, becoming one of the roads most closely associated with the movement of salt in the Roman world. This was not built casually. This was infrastructure designed with precision and intention. The empire did not merely consume salt. It managed the route, taxed the movement, and controlled who could bring salt into the city and at what price. The road was not just a road, it was a toll gate stretched across geography. And here is the first pattern to lock into your mind. It was never about the product, it was always about the infrastructure surrounding the product. Rome did not become powerful because it had salt. Rome became powerful because it built the road and then taxed every single transaction that moved along it. The salt was almost irrelevant. The road was the wealth engine. Think about the roads you travel through every single day in modern life. The credit card networks, the e-commerce platforms, the app stores, the streaming platforms. These are not products, they are roads. And the companies that built those roads collect a toll on every single transaction that passes through them, whether they created the product or not. This is not modern innovation. This is the Via Salaria rebuilt in digital form. The pattern is identical, only the material has changed. But Rome was only the beginning. Move forward into the medieval period, and the logic of salt control becomes even more sophisticated and far more ruthless. In France, the monarchy introduced what became one of the most despised tax systems in history, the gabelle. This was a royal salt tax that forced French citizens to buy a minimum amount of salt each year from crown-controlled distributors at crown-controlled prices. It did not matter if you were wealthy or starving. You were required by law to purchase this amount of salt from the king's merchants. The gabelle was not a random policy. It was a masterwork of captive market design. The king did not compete for your salt business. He simply made it illegal to buy salt from anyone else. He owned the source, controlled the distribution, set the price, and mandated the purchase. You had no alternative and no exit. Historians who study only political drama miss what is happening underneath. This was not tyranny for its own sake. This was a revenue architecture. The king had structured himself inside a system where money moved toward him automatically, not because of his effort, but because of his position. The distinction between effort and position is one of the most important ideas this channel returns to again and again, and SALT makes it impossible to ignore. The French monarch was not working harder than his subjects. He was not smarter in some obvious way. He had simply placed himself at the gate, and when you own the gate, the flow comes to you. Now let us move to a city that understood the logic of controlled flow better than almost any other civilization in recorded history: Venice. The Republic of Venice in the medieval and early Renaissance period was not just a wealthy trading city. It was a machine designed around monopoly control of critical commodities, and salt was the engine underneath everything. Venice established what can only be described as a salt empire. They did not merely trade salt, they systematically acquired control over salt production sites across the Adriatic, the Mediterranean, and beyond. They used regulation, trade policy, storage, shipping power, and strategic access to strengthen their position around salt. At different moments, Venice restricted competition, protected supply routes, and used salt revenue as part of a larger commercial system. If you wanted access to the most powerful commercial network in the Western world, you paid your toll in salt. This is leverage in its most ancient and honest form. Venice did not produce the most salt in the world. They controlled the access points where commerce had to pass. They inserted themselves into the necessary path of trade so skillfully that participation in the broader economy required participation in their system. Sound familiar? Because this is precisely how modern logistics companies, payment processors, and marketplace platforms operate today. You do not need to produce what people want. You need to own the infrastructure through which what people want must travel. Drop one word in the comments right now. What is the modern version of salt in your world? Data, credit, housing, attention, distribution? Write one word below. I want to see what patterns you are already recognizing. Let us pause here and name the principle clearly, because this is the architecture lesson. Throughout every example we have covered so far, from Roman roads to French royal mandates to Venetian trade networks, the same structure appears. A resource becomes essential. Someone builds or claims infrastructure around that resource. They tax, toll, mandate, or monopolize the flow. Income becomes passive, structural, and compounding. The individual transactions are almost irrelevant. The system collects regardless. Now here is what most people miss when they study this history. They look at the rulers, the armies, the policies, the wars. They focus on the drama of power. But the real story is always the quiet question underneath. Who designed the gate? Because the person who designed the gate rarely made the headlines. The tax collector is not remembered. The road builder is often forgotten. The merchant who quietly acquired all the salt works along the Adriatic coast does not get a famous portrait. But the geometry of their thinking, the way they positioned themselves, the infrastructure they built or claimed, that geometry is what created generational wealth. Let me translate the system into one image. Everyone knows the river. Everyone swims in the river. Everyone benefits from the river. But the person who builds the dam does not swim. The dam builder does not compete for fish. The dam builder does not work harder than the fisherman. The dam builder simply controls where the water goes and at what cost it is released. Salt was not the river, it was the dam. And the empires that understood this did not become wealthy by working harder. They became wealthy by choosing where to build. Now let us take this pattern out of ancient history and into the American industrial context, because this same architecture has been replicated in modern America with stunning precision. When John D. Rockefeller was building Standard Oil in the late 19th century, the public narrative was about oil. Everyone talked about oil. Reporters wrote about oil. Competitors fought about oil. But Rockefeller himself was not primarily thinking about oil. He was thinking about pipelines and railroads. He was thinking about who controlled the infrastructure through which oil had to move from the ground to the consumer. He negotiated favorable railroad arrangements and rebate structures that gave Standard Oil advantages many competitors could not match. He did not just want to produce the most oil. He wanted to sit at the gate and toll everyone who tried to move products through the system. The Salt Road became the pipeline. The Venetian trade network became the railroad rebate system. The French Gabelle became the refinery monopoly. The structure is identical across 5,000 years of economic history. Different materials, different centuries, different names, the same geometry. And this brings us to what you should actually be learning from all of this. Because if this video is only interesting history, I have failed. The reason this channel returns to systems like this is not nostalgia. It is because these patterns are alive right now, operating right now in every industry you can name. Consider Amazon. Amazon did not begin as an infrastructure company. It began as an online bookstore. But at some point, the people running Amazon recognized something the salt merchants of ancient Venice would have recognized immediately. The real wealth is not in the products moving through the system. The real wealth is in owning the system. Amazon Web Services, the logistics network, the fulfillment centers, the payment rails, the advertising layer, the marketplace platform. Each of these is a gate. And every business that operates within the Amazon ecosystem pays a toll at each gate every single day, regardless of whether Amazon itself sells them a competing product. Now let us bring this even closer, because here is where most people get stuck. They understand the concept intellectually. They can see the pattern in Rome, in Venice, in Rockefeller, in Amazon. But they cannot see it in their own life, their own industry, their own skills, their own business. And that is exactly the gap this channel is designed to close. Ask yourself this question honestly. In your current work, your current income, your current professional life, are you the river or are you the dam? Are you participating in someone else's system, providing value that flows through a gate you do not own? Or are you positioned somewhere that allows you to collect on the movement of others? This is not a moral question. It is not a judgment of your current position. It is a diagnostic question, because you cannot improve your position until you understand your position. Here is a concrete exercise you can do right now today, before this video is even finished. Think about your current industry, your current job, your current business or skill set. Draw a simple flow map. Where does value enter your industry? Who creates it? Where does it travel? What gates exist along the path from creation to consumer? Who owns those gates? And finally, where are you on that map? Are you upstream near creation? Are you downstream near consumption? Or are you positioned at a gate where you can collect on the flow? This is not about working harder. This is about understanding the geometry of your industry. The salt merchants of Rome did not work harder than the workers in the salt flats. The Venetian trade masters did not labor more than the sailors who moved the product. They worked on a different layer of the system. And that layer, the structural layer, the gate layer, is where leverage lives. If this video is making you question where you are positioned inside your own system, there is a workbook that was built specifically for this kind of thinking. It is called the Positioning Code Workbook. You will find it linked below. It walks you through the process of mapping your own river, identifying your leverage points, and building a clear 90-day repositioning plan. It is not motivational. It is not vague theory. It is a structured analytical tool for people who want to understand their position before making their next strategic move. The link is in the description. Now back to the history. Because we are not finished. Because the story of salt does not end with Venice or Rome or even Rockefeller. It ends, or rather it transforms, in a place most people would never connect to: ancient commodity control. India, 1930. Mahatma Gandhi's Salt March was one of the most strategically brilliant acts of civil resistance in modern history, and most people remember it as a protest, as a symbol, as courage. All of those things are true. But what is rarely discussed is the precise economic logic Gandhi was targeting. Because Gandhi was not simply protesting British rule in general, he was targeting the Salt Act, a law that gave the British colonial government a complete monopoly over salt production in India. Indian citizens were prohibited from collecting or selling salt independently. They were required to purchase salt from British-controlled distributors at British set prices. Salt was taxed. Salt was controlled. The gate was British. The flow was British. The wealth was British. Gandhi understood something that very few resistors throughout history have understood with such clarity. When you want to break a system of control, you do not attack the ruler. You attack the gate. You expose the gate. You demonstrate that the gate is artificial, that it requires your cooperation to function, and that when you withdraw your cooperation, the gate loses its power. The Salt March was not simply a protest about salt. It was a demonstration that the infrastructure of control only works when the controlled consent to be controlled. And here is the quiet lesson inside that historical moment for every person watching this video. The systems that extract value from you do not hide their gates. They simply make the gates feel natural. They make them feel inevitable. They normalize the toll until you stop asking who built the gate and why it is there, and who it actually benefits. Salt tasted the same whether it was taxed or free. The mineral had not changed. Only the system around it had changed, and that system required your participation to continue. This is why understanding economic history is not a hobby. It is a strategic discipline. Because the patterns inside ancient commodity markets do not stay in ancient commodity markets, they migrate, they evolve. They put on different clothes and reappear in every era. The question is whether you are trained to see them, or whether you have been trained to accept them. Consider a few modern examples before we close, because this is where the application layer becomes most powerful. Grocery distribution in America is a system most people never think about. You walk into a store, you pick up food, you pay. But inside that transaction is a vast infrastructure of positioning. The shelf, specifically the placement on the shelf. Brands pay millions of dollars annually for premium placement, the eye-level shelf, the end cap, the checkout lane. The grocery chain does not produce the food. It owns the shelf space. The shelf space is the gate. The flow of consumer attention must pass through it, and the owner of the gate collects a toll from every brand that wants access. Or think about talent agencies in the entertainment and sports industries. The talent, the actor, the athlete, the musician creates the value, but the agency owns the relationships. The agency owns the access to studios, to broadcasters, to leagues, to record labels. The talent creates. The agency controls the gate between talent and market. And that gate earns a percentage of every deal that passes through it, often for the lifetime of the relationship, regardless of who did the creative work. Or look at the streaming wars that defined the early 21st century. Content creators produced extraordinary work, but the real wealth was not in the content. It was in the platform. The platform owned the subscriber relationship. The platform owned the recommendation algorithm. The platform owned the data. The content was the salt. The platform was the road. And every creator who wanted their work to reach an audience had to either build their own road or pay the toll to use someone else's. Now ask yourself the real question. Not the comfortable version of the question, the actual question. In your own life, your own career, your own business, your own skills, are you building a road or are you walking on someone else's road and paying every step of the way? Because both of those positions can generate income, but only one of them generates leverage. Only one of them compounds. Only one of them creates wealth that does not require you to keep moving to survive. Here is the summary of everything salt has taught us. Salt was never just a mineral. It was a demonstration of a principle that has never failed across thousands of years of recorded economic history. The principle is this: essential resources, when placed behind controlled infrastructure, generate structural wealth regardless of who labors, regardless of who creates, and regardless of who consumes. The salt was ordinary. The road was the asset. The road was the dam. The road was the gate. The Roman Empire taxed the road and funded a civilization. Venice controlled the route and built a 500-year commercial dynasty. The French monarchy mandated the purchase and funded royal expansion across Europe. The British colonial system taxed the grain, the cotton, and the salt, and extracted the wealth of an entire subcontinent. And in every single case, the wealth did not come from working harder than the people being taxed. It came from owning the position where value had to pass. This is the core of what this channel is built on. not motivation, not hustle, not the advice that gets you clapping but leaves you in the same position tomorrow. The core of this channel is the teaching of systems. How wealth is actually structured, how positions are created, defended, and leveraged, how to read the geometry of an industry and find where the gate is, who owns it, and whether you have the clarity and the strategy to build toward one of your own. If you think in frameworks like this, if you are the kind of person who watches a video about salt and immediately starts thinking about your own industry, your own leverage, your own gate, then this channel was built for you. Consider subscribing and continue studying these systems with us. Because every video on this channel is built the same way: historical system, structural principle, modern application, and a framework you can use. This is where serious students of wealth come to study. And before we close, I want to return to the workbook one more time, because this is where the conversation moves from intellectual to operational. Understanding the SALT principle is one thing. Mapping your own position is another. The Positioning Code Workbook is a structured analytical document. It does not give you inspiration, it gives you a process. You will map your industry from creation to consumer. You will identify the gates that currently exist. You will assess where you currently sit on that map. And you will build a 90-day plan for moving yourself closer to a position of leverage. If that sounds like the kind of work you're ready to do, the link is below. Now I want to close with a question, not a simple one, a real one that I want you to sit with. In the industry you are in right now, whether that is your business, your career, your skill, your craft, your content, your creative work, your service, whatever it is, do you know where the gate is? Do you know who built it? Do you know who benefits from it most? And do you know, with honest precision, exactly where you sit in relation to that gate? Because here is the uncomfortable truth that SALT teaches us. Most people never ask those questions. They spend entire careers and entire lives moving value through systems they do not own, generating wealth that flows through gates they never saw, toward positions they never questioned. And the people sitting at those gates are not working harder than you. They simply understood something earlier. They understood that in every system, in every era, in every industry, there is a road, and there is a dam, and the dam does not work, the dam positions. SALT built empires. SALT funded wars. SALT enslaved populations and liberated them. SALT became tied to compensation, monopoly power, taxation, and some of the earliest large-scale trade systems. And salt, an ordinary mineral sitting on your table right now, was only powerful because of one thing. Someone figured out how to make the world need to pass through them to get it. The resource changes, the century changes, the technology changes, but the geometry of control has never changed, not once, not in 6,000 years. The gate is always the wealth, the road is always the asset, and position is always the strategy. In the next video on this channel, we are going to follow this exact pattern into another industry, another century, another commodity that you interact with every single day, without realizing that the system around it was engineered with the same ancient logic. Not for your benefit, for the benefit of whoever sits at the gate. If you understood what we talked about today, the next video will feel like a continuation of the same conversation. And it will change the way you see everything around you. If this video changed the way you see wealth, power, and the systems beneath everyday life, then you are exactly where you should be. Wealth Code Systems is not about noise, motivation, or surface-level money advice. It is about understanding the architecture behind wealth, the roads, the gates, the leverage points, and the quiet positions where value is controlled. If you think in frameworks like this, subscribe and continue studying these systems with us. Stay deliberate, stay measured, and remember, the world belongs to those who learn to see the system before they move inside it.